Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna, and this is episode number 205 of this icy yet spicy podcast with all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we're getting back on track with our 2024 NFL season preview month with part 3, covering this particular division, which is very weak, pal. It is so weak. But before we do that, we took a little bit of a detour in the last episode with our season preview month, and we talked a little bit of wrestling in a jam-packed episode with our late, out-of-date review of WWE Money in the Bank 2024, that pay-per-view event that took place this past 4th of July weekend, as well as the fallout from that show this past Monday on Raw. So if you haven't already, or you didn't know that any of those shows happened, please go check out, after this episode, my thoughts, my opinion, my late out-of-date review of WWE Money in the Bank, as well as the fallout from it from Raw in that previous episode, after this episode you're listening to right now. So make sure to listen to both episodes, and as well as listening to all episodes regarding Very Cold Lasagna, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button, smash the like button, leave a comment down below with your takes on each and every topic that I talk about in each episode. And yeah, I'll see your feedback. And yeah, let's have a conversation about it as long as we're civil and respectful about it. So that being said, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbor, share this with a stranger, share this with your coworkers, your colleagues, share the good, the bad, the ugly about my filthy casual fan takes on the world of sports. That being said, I feel like before we get the ball rolling on our third division that we're going to be talking about, which is the NFC South, in our NFL season preview month, I feel like I have to explain the expectations for the NFL season preview month once again here on Very Cold Lasagna, because I feel like some of you, no disrespect to you all, no offense to you all, I feel like some of you aren't getting the gist of it. I feel like, again, no disrespect, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here, that this is these season previews are from the perspective of a filthy casual sports fan. And I get it. I may miss some things, or I may avoid some things, and I get it may tick off some of you, but you got to remember, I'm not going to be able to cover every single little detail that X or Y team does in the offseason, because we would be here for a while. We would be here forever. And sometimes those events are not really that important, in my opinion. At least for right now. It could be important down the line, but as it stands right now, if it's not important to me, it's not going to get covered. So, that being said, again, the main points that I talk about in my season reviews are, what did the team do in the offseason that either made them better or worse? What were the other events that happened that were so significant? What were the biggest takeaways that it took from all those events that I can come together with as they head into the 2024 season? What are my questions for them? What are my concerns for them? And what are their key games for this season that could play a role as they try to make for a playoff push or try for an evaluation of sorts? So like I said, these previews are from the POV, the point of view of a filthy casual sports fan, that being me. And also keep in mind that these season previews do not take into account what happened in the off-season team activities in May, mandatory mini camps in June, and some parts of training camp that have happened already, but some of them haven't. Most of them haven't yet, but that's besides the point. So the key takeaway is these season previews are from the eyes of a filthy casual sports fan. So I get it. Some of you will still say, "Oh, you didn't say this or you didn't say that," which is fine. All right, I get it. But anyway, I just want to point that out. I just want to make the things clear so we're all on the same page. Make it worth your while as we get into the next batch of teams, which is, there's one more thing I do want to say. There is a little bit of a correction that I want to talk about from the last season preview, which was the NFC North. One of the Minnesota Vikings safeties, Kyrie Jackson, he He did pass away. There was some news well after I recorded that episode. He was involved in an unfortunate car accident. He was a passenger, and he was involved in a car accident by a drunk driver, I believe it was. And unfortunately, at a very young age, he passed away. That is very heartbreaking. It really, like when I saw that news, that's really a bummer. That really sucked. My thoughts and prayers go out to his family, the Minnesota Vikings, and that really sucks. That really goes to the heartstrings, man. So yeah. Now let's talk about the the NFC South. Part 3 of our 2024 NFL season preview month. Looking back at the division itself, it was so bad. It really lived up to its name of being billed as the weakest division going into 2023. Like no other division came close to that. Maybe you could make a case for its sister division over on the other conference with the AFC South. But going into that season last year, all 4 teams lived up to the hype with subpar play at most positions until a repeat winner was crowned down in Florida. Surprisingly, that team with the pirate ship made it as far as to the second round, but they just fell a little bit short of the NFC Championship game, making it there at least. So now you go into 2024. Other than one notable change within the division, it remains two notable changes. The NFC South is still a relatively weak division. It's still ripe for the taking. So that being said, let's talk about this relatively weak division that is known as the NFC South. Starting off part 3 of our 2024 NFL season preview month was the worst team in the NFL last year, and that was the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers last year, boy, oh boy, what an offseason they had, and what a regular season that they had. So last year, where we were at this point, a couple months prior, they decided to, you know what, we're going to make a big splash move. They decided to go up from the 9th overall pick and then trade up to the 1st overall pick with the Chicago Bears to go and get their guy. Some thought it was going to be, it's going to be CJ Stroud. No, it was the 1st overall pick from Alabama, Bryce Young. So, okay. At the time, I thought, okay, he might be he could be a decent pick for the Carolina Panthers, even at 1st overall. But man, once you get to the regular season, the move quickly blew up in David Tepper's face, and it wasn't necessarily all of Bryce Young's fault because yes, he really struggled as a rookie. But when you look at that whole team around him, especially with first-year head coach Frank Reich coaching him, they were horrible. They were really bad. They were unwatchable for a lot of the year, en route to the worst record in the NFL at 2-15. Frank Reich gets fired, not even close to the end of the regular season, probably after Thanksgiving, if I remember correctly. And yeah, the worst part of it all was you end with the worst record in the NFL that year, and you don't get the number 1 overall pick. Talk about a double whammy of ouch if you were the Carolina Panthers. So now you went to the offseason pretty much facing a relative unknown. How are you going to try to build this team around Bryce Young, your 1st overall pick, going into an important second year, but you didn't have a lot of resources to work with, other than maybe a little bit of money, I guess, but not a lot of draft capital. So looking at some of their offseason events for the Carolina Panthers, because they had to do some serious adjusting here, because they fired their head coach Frank Reich before the season ended, and they fired their general manager Scott Fitter for fucking up that trade. So they did those two things, at least for now, a little correct, I guess. They promoted their assistant general manager Dan Morgan to the proper position, general manager. They removed the assistant tag, and they made a in-division move by snatching away Bucks offensive coordinator Dave Canales to become the head coach. So Dave Canales, some of you may know him for revitalizing Baker Mayfield last year with the Bucks. Now he comes over in hopes to try to figure out how can I revitalize, how can I have Bryce Young have a breakout second year. So that'll be interesting to see. Some other things that you might want to know, that they traded away their franchise tagged edge rusher Brian Burns to the Giants. I guess they unfortunately could not come to a long-term deal between Burns and the Panthers, which is unfortunate for their pass rush. And they made a player-for-player move, getting receiver Deontay Johnson, but they unfortunately trade one of their best corners in Dante Jackson to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a player-for-player move. For the Panthers, some of the other moves that they made in free agency, they added the likes of Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis to that offensive line, although they massively overpaid them, which was kind of interesting if you think about it. And then on the other side of the ball, on the other side of the line, you look at guys like A'Shawn Robinson and Jadeveon Clowney in hopes of trying to replace Ryan Burns in the pass rush. And also as well as linebacker Josie Jewell from the Broncos. So on top of losing Brian Burns, you also lost Frankie Louvu, one of your other top linebackers. You also lose edge rusher Yudu Gross-Matos for the 49ers. So some of them were key losses, others not so much. But in the draft, that's where the Panthers did a lot of the dirty work by getting Bryce Young some much needed help, like receiver Xavier Legette from South Carolina, running back Jonathan Brooks from Texas, and defensively, corner Chau Smooth Wade at Washington State. So the Panthers overall, when you look at their offseason, I was very doubtful of them. I was very doubtful of them despite the limited resource that they had. No first overall pick, but they actually had a decent offseason, a close to solid offseason. Now they may have overpaid greatly on their two guards. Like I think one of them has a 5-year, $100 million contract, if I'm correct. Like $25 million a year. Wow, very surprising. But their draft turned out to be better than I expected, and again, despite not having a first overall pick. So those draft picks seem to be pretty good, doing good so far in those OTAs and minicamp. And while it's just that, Bryce Young at least has something functional to work with compared to all season last year, where he had practically nothing to work with other than Adam Thielen last year. So at least he has a kind of receiving core for now, and a kind of running back, I guess. So when you look at the Panthers going into 2024, obviously the top goal for them is Bryce Young needs to show improvement. See, now that you have a kind of supporting cast and slightly better protection up front, Bryce Young needs to show that he has to improve. He has to show that with the new head coach, he has to rise to the occasion. So for the Panthers going into this season, looking at some of the key games, I don't expect them to compete for a playoff spot, at least not right now. So they're years away from that, but their games in this evaluation season, it's always important, So some key games here, like going up against the New Orleans Saints in a division matchup in week 1. Let's see if you can make a first impression within the division. And then you come home in your home opener to face the LA Chargers against Justin Herbert. And then you go a couple weeks later to the Chicago Bears. And some people are touting this as a coveted matchup between two number 1 overall picks from the last 2 years. This year was Caleb Williams, and last year, Bryce Young. We kind of had this matchup between the Bears and the Panthers last year, and look how that turned out. There's a reason why they're not in prime time this year. And then the following week, you get to host the Atlanta Falcons, another key divisional matchup for both sides, and we'll see where they stand there. So looking at some of the things I'm a little iffy on for Carolina this year, one of those things is in their cornerback room. He doesn't get talked about a lot much when I talk about Panthers on Very Cold Lasagna. And that's J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn got drafted by the Panthers a couple years ago, and he hasn't played a lot. He has a sketchy injury history, and it's starting to show. Actually, it has been showing for the Carolina Panthers. Even before he got, again, going back to that sketchy injury history, he's had it in college, and now it's going into the NFL. I really hope that he can stay healthy for most of this season because they really need him. They really need J.C. Horn to stay healthy. He can play. He can certainly play. He's a playmaker. But the problem is his ability to stay healthy. He's injury prone. So if the Panthers can't get out of that, then they need to find a replacement in the offseason next year. And then my last bit is like, can Dave Canales get anything out of Miles Sanders? Because Miles Sanders, when he came over from the Philadelphia Eagles last year, he didn't get the same player that he was in Philadelphia. And I'm not sure why. Because by the time we got to late in the season, he was benched. He lost a lot of playing time to Chuba Hubbard. And now you see that they drafted another running back on day 2 in Jonathan Brooks. But he's not expected to be ready because he's still recovering from a torn ACL. But head coach Dave Canales can use this time to hopefully instill some confidence back in what should have been their starting running back in Miles Sanders. Because Miles Sanders is getting paid a lot of money to be a starting running back, and yet he's not playing like one. So overall, owner David Tepper actually was hands-off a little bit, at least from what I'm understanding, for once, and let his new head coach, his new GM, actually do their own business. But the Panthers, they should be a little bit more competitive this year, at least on paper. But that's all going to depend on how Bryce Young does in what's going to be a key second year for the Carolina Panthers. So moving on from the Carolinas down to the host city of WWE Bad Blood in October, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons in 2023, well, let's just say it was another rerun of 2022. It was also a rerun of 2021. It was the same song and dance as their last 2 seasons. Give their fans fake hope of trying to win the NFC South, only to collapse in that year thanks to head coach Arthur Smith's dumbassery of relying on less talented players. Like, really? You have, the quarterback situation was not great, but you still have these talented players that they can make the most out of. Like Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and especially B. John Robinson, like Jr. And yet you play the lesser talented backups behind them. No wonder they ended the season 7-10 and 3rd place again in the division. You didn't make the playoffs again, and they got their ass handed in the season finale against New Orleans. Clap, clap. So Arthur Smith gets fired in the offseason, and rightfully so. The owner finally had enough of the bullshit, and they bring in Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. So it's a little bit of a different philosophy now. You go from an offensive-minded head coach to a defensive-minded head coach. So it's going to be interesting how that works out for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, it worked before with Dan Quinn a couple years prior, but now, I mean, things are different philosophy, but we will see. And then the other big major move that the Falcons made was at the game's most important position, the quarterback position. And obviously, they've had a lot of instability at that position since Matt Ryan was traded to the Indianapolis Colts 3 years ago. And now they've decided, okay, enough is enough with Desmond Ridder. Unfortunately, he didn't pan out. And obviously, Taylor Heineke can't be the answer long term. So they decided to go and get free agent quarterback Kirk Cousins. So Kirk Cousins opted out. And then now he's part of the Atlanta Falcons. But the thing is, he's coming off a torn Achilles injuries. And I think the Falcons also got in trouble for tampering with Kirk Cousins' free agent status. Correct me on that if I'm wrong on that. But either way, Kirk Cousins, is now a part of the Minnesota Vikings. And he should elevate this offense a little bit more. Hopefully, that'll be the case. But again, coming off a torn Achilles injury. That remains to be seen if he's ready to go come week 1. And they also decided to re-sign Taylor Heineke. And they also traded away Desmond Ridder to the Arizona Cardinals because, well, he was expendable at that point. So if you're the Atlanta Falcons, obviously, now that you have your quarterback, Kirk Cousins, there's only one thing that you could do heading into 2024 and throughout 2024. And that was something that you couldn't do for the last several years, and that was win the NFC South. So that was going to be easier said than done because you have to make some moves. You have to make some moves to get to that point and support your new quarterback and Kirk Cousins. So for the Falcons, they really didn't lose all that much in free agency. Again, traded away Desmond Ridder to the Cardinals. He was expendable. Cordell Patterson, he left to another team, but again, not losing much, even though he was a productive player for the last couple of years. But again, you have new running backs now, more productive running backs now. You got you lost a couple of receivers, like Matt Collins and Van Jefferson. Not losing much though. You did lose a little bit of a productive player in Calais Campbell to the Miami Dolphins. A weak pass rush, but he was a productive player for them though. So they try to counter some of these losses with the likes of Darnell Mooney from the Bears, Rondale Moore from the Cardinals. So that should help out a little bit with Kirk Cousins. And defensively, they got Antonio Hamilton from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll see if any of those additions help out for Atlanta. And then the draft was a very curious one for Atlanta. A very interesting and very controversial one for them. And, well, let's just talk about the picks after that. So they address some of their needs, and whether it's good or bad, that's up for you to decide because I thought it was okay. It was all right, but nothing special. Like defensive tackle Ruke Orojo from Clemson, edge rusher Braylon Trice from Washington. Maybe those two could help out the very weak pass rushing rotation group that's been a problem for Atlanta these last couple of years. And then again, a linebacker J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame. But all that gets put to the wayside because of the dumb dick decision that they did at number 8 overall. Getting Michael Penix Jr. from Washington when you already signed Kirk Cousins to a big fat contract when he was still recovering from a torn Achilles. I'm like, what? My thought process, and I was talking to my dad about this. I was like, why did they draft Penix when they already had Kirk Cousins? And I get maybe they're trying to build towards the future, or maybe Kirk Cousins is not ready. But is Michael Penix ready? From what I've read, little snippets of it, Penix has a little bit of an injury history too, and a little bit of a concerning one too. So it's alarming. It's alarming that the Falcons decided to sign a free agent quarterback that's still okay for that. That still can play. That still can ball out. But then you also draft a quarterback that really wasn't a pressing need right now. What the hell is Arthur Blank doing? Like, I really was baffled by this one. So again, when I look at this offseason for the Falcons heading into 2024, the Falcons should be better with Kirk Cousins, but man, I'm really not sure about that Penix pick. Because again, the quarterback position has been a serious problem ever since Matt Ryan was traded. But yeah, I just don't understand. Again, that Penix pick is just really bugging me. It was a stupid decision. So I know I'm trying not to spend a lot of time on it, but I really hope it pans out for Atlanta in the end. And maybe someone can explain it to me better, like whether it's on YouTube or a social media message, but I'm not seeing it yet. I'm not seeing the benefit quite yet on why they need to draft Penix now, or any quarterback at that matter, when you still have Kirk Cousins right then and there. And you also have Taylor Heineke as a backup too. Make that make sense. So anyway, You also have a pass rushing unit, like going back to them, it's still a middling bunch. And they didn't do a whole lot outside of like Orojo, who was kind of in college, and nabbing Braylon Trice. Braylon Trice seems to be the only decent one. So the Falcons defense, which is back end, is also could be facing personnel issues. This overall unit could once again be an average unit that gives it way too many chunk plays, too much first downs. This whole Falcons team could be in for something, man. So looking at this Falcons team that has an opportunity to try and win the division with a better quarterback, but it's gonna be an interesting one because they got an interesting schedule. When they got a lot of key games like very early on in the season, like a week 3 to 5 gauntlet. Actually, weeks 2 to 5 against the Philadelphia Eagles on a Monday night, and then they come home for a gauntlet against the Chiefs, the Saints, and the Bucs. Wow. Talk about a woozy. And then you go on the road to take on the Panthers in week 6. Wow. It's like 3 straight division games that the Falcons have to win, like right then and there. Think about that. So when you look at the Falcons overall going into the season, obviously you have to wonder if Kirk Cousins is going to be that guy for Atlanta, especially coming off an Achilles injury. So, I mean, I don't know that. I know I'm doubting it. I know I'm doubting it right now. But again, Kirk Cousins still makes some smart plays, but also Kirk Cousins can make some dumb plays. But in the end, I mean, at least it's better than what we've seen from the likes of Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota. Better than those options, I guess. They can do better. They certainly do better with Kirk Cousins than any of those options that I just mentioned. So for the Falcons, despite a bad draft, still had an okay offseason, mainly because of getting Kirk Cousins. And again, should make the team better as long as he's fully recovered from that Achilles tear and can still play. Whether or not he is or not, the Falcons are going to have to use any and all resources that can finally get them over that hump, the 7-10 hump. And they can finally stake claim to the NFC South, even if they're going to lose that one playoff game anyway. With this future division and with a better quarterback, they do have a chance, especially with this future division. But if they don't take advantage of that, well, I'm not sure what else they can do. Moving on to the Big Easy, which has become the Big Hard for the last couple of years, and I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, in 2023, they had a prime chance to take over the NFC South with the acquisition of quarterback Derek Carr and the Tampa Bay Bucs acquiring a new quarterback now that Tom Brady has retired. But for the Saints, the inconsistency and glaring weaknesses of not just Derek Carr, but the overall team itself, it cost themselves valuable games and then eventually the division to the Tampa Bay Bucs. So when you look at that Saints team, people were calling me out, oh, they're mid. They're not mid. Like they still have plenty of talent around that team. But unfortunately for them, that didn't show up on the field, especially in red zone situations, especially when they needed to score touchdowns rather than field goals. But unfortunately, they didn't. And their season ended at 9-8 and missed the playoffs and the division to the Bucs. So, Saints, how are they going to rectify that? How are they going to try and win this putrid division? Well, looking at the one key offseason event for the New Orleans Saints, they replaced their offense coordinator, Pete Carmichael, with Clint Kubiak in hopes of trying to try to spark this offense in any way, shape, or form, especially try to spark up Derek Carr. So, going into this season, obviously, you want to either try to commit to winning the division or at least try to build towards the future. There's no two timelines, as certain teams like to do in the NBA. And maybe even some teams do it in the NFL too. But either way, the New Orleans Saints have to pick a timeline here. Commit to winning the division or build towards the future. Especially when you look at some of their key offseason moves. Because once again, they're like the team, one of those teams in the NFL that were like well over the red, well over the salary cap. Like they didn't have any money to spend, so they had to make a lot of cost-cutting measures, like releasing Michael Thomas. Unfortunately, he was no longer producing at the level he once did. They also let go Jameis Winston to the Cleveland Browns. They also let go two of their key offensive linemen. Andrews Pete, he left as a free agent, and then they released Max Garcia. And they tried to rectify that with some of their additions, like receiver Cedric Wilson from the Cowboys. They also, probably one of their big key additions was edge rusher Chase Young from the 49ers. So trying to give it a little bit of help for Cameron Jordan in that very weak pass rush for the New Orleans Saints, as well as adding linebacker Willie Gay to the front seven from the Chiefs. Maybe those small moves on defense should help them out in the very least. The draft is where they did their dirty work, though, and I feel like this is where they at least had a very positive impact, like getting an offensive lineman, a tackle by the name of Talise Fuaga Morgan. I feel like this should really help the offensive line for the Saints, and if it doesn't, then damn. But it's this one right here. Corner Kool-Aid McKinstry from Georgia. And I was very surprised that, looking at those little highlight snippets on draft day, then they're showing it on TV, he looks pretty good. He looks very good. And I was surprised that he fell down all the way to day 2. So, yeah, the Saints snatched him up. He should be a major help to that secondary that really struggled last year, especially when Montrell Lattimore was out. And then probably another big move that the Saints made was more towards the future and getting a quarterback by the name of Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. More on him in a bit, though. And then they got another receiver by the name of Bud Memes from Pittsburgh. So adding some help to a kind of weak Saints receiving core. So for the New Orleans Saints, they had themselves a strong draft, despite a few picks to work with. But for the Saints, they made the most of them when they had the likes of Fuaga, McKinstry, both who should be big helps in their respective areas. Fuaga with the offensive line, McKinstry with the corner group. And going back to Spencer Rattler, sorry. He's an interesting one because from what I was seeing on the Twitter timeline and the clips leading up to the draft, he looks an all right quarterback. He looks mentally poised. Could throw a good ball. Apparently he fell down though because he portrayed himself as an asshole on a reality TV show while he's at high school. Again, the key word was high school. I mean, yeah, sure, he was immature, but just because he's immature in high school doesn't mean people can change. Let's come on, man. People grow up. People change. Like, don't you think he deserves another crack at it? Just saying. And if he doesn't, then yeah, feel free to go and get him. But come on, man. I feel like there was no need to go after the guy and make him fall down that hard. I mean, it is what it is at this point. It's a moot point. But if Spencer Rattler develops well and lives up to the hype that he could have gotten, then the Saints could figure out to start him sometime in the future once Derek Carr's big fat contract is up, or whenever the Saints decide that, okay, maybe it's time to check out Spencer Rattler and what he could bring to the table as a starting quarterback in the NFL and to our team. But on the more negative note, there are still a lot of major issues on both sides of the ball. When you look at the offense, Derek Carr is still going to be lacking help at both running back and receiver, because all you have on a running back is Alvin Kamara, who has missed considerable time in the last 2 seasons. And looking at the receiving spot, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Now, I know you drafted a receiver by the name of Bud Memes, but we have yet to see if he's going to have any kind of meaningful impact and any kind of significant playing time in the regular season. So if he's going to be a impact player, then great. But that is remains to be seen. Defensively, Cam Jordan, outside of Chase Young, isn't going to get much help in the pass rush, which is going to, again, lead to more pressure onto the secondary. They're going to have to perform very well again. And that's going to also depend on whether Marshawn Lattimore is going to stay healthy. And if he does stay healthy, that's going to be a big boost for Kool-Aid McKinstry. But that remains to be seen. This group is going to be seriously tested. So looking at some of their key games going into 2024, week 1, a division game very early on at home against the Carolina Panthers. But then you get a gauntlet against the Dallas Cowboys on the road, and then you come back home to take on the Philadelphia Eagles and Jalen Hurts. That's going to be a tough one right there. And then you go on the road the following week to take on the Atlanta Falcons, another key divisional game that the Saints absolutely need to have, especially when you face their new starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins. So when you look at the Saints going to 2024, the one thing I need to ask, especially, and I know it'll piss people off, can Derek Carr be more than mid? Yep. I come on, man. Yes, he has a middling supporting cast once more, and I don't mean this as an insult, but this should be the year Derek Carr needs to make the most of what he has. Take some risky throws. And I know he's had a career of, playing it safe, being conservative, being a check down guy. But at least there were flashes last year where, he would take those long bomb throws, those more aggressive throws. But in the red zone, not so much. I mean, obviously you can't throw a long bomb in the red zone, but still, take some chances, take some risks, because the more you have him take the conservative route, especially when the pocket breaks down, and especially in red zone situations, the more the Saints are going to lose these key games, and the more the Saints are going to take field goals instead of touchdowns when they need those 4 points compared to those 7 points compared to the 3 points. So at least he's going to have a new offensive coordinator in Kubiak, but it's not going to matter much if he's the same mid quarterback he's been for the last several years of his career. And then at the running back position, who's going to be that second option behind Alvin Kamara? Because going back to his health issues, New Orleans is going to need to hope that one of its backup running backs that's currently on that 90-man roster that's going to get cut down to 53 is going to step up big in the event that Kamara misses some time. Now, they do have a guy by the name of Kendre Miller who had a really good performance in that blowout win against the Falcons, but that was in the season finale where by that point, it didn't really matter all that much when it was turning into a blowout, and it was only one game. Can he replicate that into more games? We will see. And that's if he's going to be that backup to Kamara. So the Saints, despite being deep in the red again, they added some good pieces to play now and for the future. Then, obviously, with this being the NFC South, they're going to have a good chance once again to make the playoffs because, again, this division sucks ass. And their schedule outside of it is honestly not too bad, but that's going to be dependent on whether they can overcome their serious flaws, like with the pass rush, receiver, running back, pretty much over almost all of the team. So they get past that, they can win the division. But those serious flaws, man, they're going to get clear. They're going to catch up to them real fast by more superior teams in the NFL. And if it catches up to them, well, it's going to be a long season in the big hard real quick. Wrapping up part 3 of our 2024 NFL season preview month is none other than the 4-time defending NFC South champions, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs were staring at a lost season halfway through 2023, and that was because, well, Baker Mayfield and the Bucs were staring at a lot of inconsistencies. They were losing some pretty winnable games, but they turned it around to win the NFC South once again in the last week of the regular season. And in the playoffs, they got further by one game. But nonetheless, it's still an accomplishment. They clipped the wings of the Philadelphia Eagles in their home playoff game in the wild card. And in the divisional game, they were in a nail-biter with the Lions. But unfortunately, they fell just short of making the NFC Championship game, and they lost to Detroit in that divisional game. So if you're Baker Mayfield and the Bucs, obviously there are a lot of things that need to be accomplished in the offseason if you want to reach your goal for the 2024 season. And that was repeat as division champions, keep your stranglehold on the South, and hope for a much deeper playoff run, like making the NFC Championship game. So doing that, there's going to require a lot of work for Tampa Bay, because looking at some of these offseason events for Tampa, there's a little bit of turnover, but also they managed to at least keep a lot of their guys. Like, for example, they re-signed quarterback Baker Mayfield. They re-signed Mike Evans. They also re-signed safety Antoine Winfield, and they managed to keep Lavonte David. So 4 key parts of that season, they're pretty much back. And that is a good thing for this Bucs team. But they did lose Baker Mayfield's offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, who went on to become the Panthers head coach. And they replaced him with Liam Cohen, the former University of Kentucky offensive coordinator. But he does have some brief familiarity with Baker during their brief time together with the LA Rams, when Baker was there for like a month, very late in the season. So looking at some of their other key offseason moves for the Bucs, I know they had a lot of free agents, a lot of free agents in the market, but honestly, when you look at it, they didn't really lose out on a lot, and that is a good thing. At least in my opinion. At least that's how I'm viewing it when I saw this. They had a lot, but they didn't lose a lot. So 2 key guys that they did lose, though, was Shaquille Barrett to the Miami Dolphins and linebacker Devin White to the Eagles. So it was a little curious choice why they let Devin White go, because I felt like he was an integral part of that front 7 alongside Lavonte David. So I'm a little curious why they let him go, but maybe he just didn't get the right amount of money that he was hoping from Tampa Bay. So they did add a couple of guys to try and make up for those losses, like edge rusher Randy Gregory from the 49ers, and safety Jordan Whitehead, and corner Bryce Hall from the Jets. So trying to beef up a little that weak passing defense here and there. So they offensively, they also tried to get Baker Mayfield some help by getting Sterling Shepard from the Giants. And the draft is where they did their dirty work for the most part, by adding to that offensive line that really struggled in the interior, like getting a center, Brandon Graham from Duke. He's going to be a key contributor, but I'll talk about in a little bit. And defensively, they added Chris Braswell from Alabama at edge rusher, and safety Tyke Smith from Georgia. So when you look at this Bucs team going into 2024, their offense, more specifically Baker Mayfield, they should be better protected. For as successful as Baker and the Bucs were last year, one of the biggest issues that they were having, and one of the reasons why they were having that bad stretch in the middle of the season, was protecting Baker Mayfield on key downs. He was getting sacked a lot, and he also was pressured into making some bad back-breaking mistakes, especially in the interior offensive line. So they addressed that in this offseason by drafting Graham Barton, which is a good choice. So he seems like a seamless choice to be the true successor to Ryan Jensen, who retired last offseason. And the only thing that they need to resolve is the left guard spot. That still needs to resolve in training camp and going into the preseason. But at least for now, the offensive line in the interior should be improved. It should be really improved. But what isn't improved yet is that passing defense. Like, I have some concerns there still. Corner Jamel Dean and safety Antoine Winfield, they're at least back, which is good because they're big key playmakers for that Bucs defense. But man, some of their offseason moves, it worries me. It worries me. Like trading away Carlton Davis to the Lions, and trying to hope that their young depth corners or like Bryce Hall can fill in the gap. That worries me a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying Bryce Hall is a bad player, but I just hope that someone can replace Carlton Davis just like that and be a key contributing playmaker. Otherwise, this passing defense is going to struggle again, giving up key downs, giving up big plays like it did last year. Meanwhile, they did draft safety Tyke Smith and bringing back Jordan Whitehead, but again, just like with the corners, remains to be seen if either can be a difference maker. Looking at some of their key games going into the 2024 season, it starts at home against the Washington Commanders, seeing whether this new, improved, well, both of these teams. Whether these improved teams can seriously make a dent at each other. And then you travel to Detroit in week 2 to take on the Lions in an NFC divisional rematch from last year. That should be a fun one. And then 2 weeks later, you take on the Philadelphia Eagles in a rematch of that NFC wildcard game where the Bucs whooped their ass. And then a little bit of a gauntlet, a double game gauntlet for the Bucs, going to Atlanta and going to New Orleans, key divisional games that are going to matter for their division title defense. So obviously the big question I have for the Tampa Bay Bucs going into this season is centered around Baker Mayfield. How is he going to follow up this comeback like 2023 with, well, whatever we're expecting in 2024? Because, yeah, he's coming off a career year after a mixed first 4 years in Cleveland where he got drafted, and then he gets traded to Carolina, and then the Rams, and then he gets waived in the middle of 2022, and then he comes on to the Rams very late in the season off waivers, very very inconsistent in that last month, and then he signs on with the Bucs, and then boom, resurgence. So should be interesting now that teams are more familiar with how Mayfield operates. Mayfield signs a kind of big fat contract, so it's going to be on him to exceed expectations once more in 2024. He's got to live up to that now. So the Bucs still made some noticeable upgrades, despite some noticeable holes on their roster. It gives them a crack at competing with the Saints and the Falcons for this division. I know people were doubting the Bucs, after the loss to the Lions, and like saying, this was their only avenue this season. But they're still in the weak division after all. So yeah, their schedule's harder. It's gonna be tougher than last year, but that's the thing when you have a first place schedule now. That's what happens when you're division champions for the last 4 years. And we have to see how Baker Mayfield's going to do with yet another new coordinator. But at least with this one, he has brief history with. And I'll say this, as long as they stay healthy and they keep pace with their division, especially with the Saints and with the Falcons, they have a really good chance to repeat as NFC South champions for a fifth time. Fourth, I've been saying fourth, but it's 2020, 2021, 2022. Five time. They'll be a 5-time division champion if they could do that in 2024. So I think they got a real good shot of doing that this year, as long as they stay healthy and they can play pretty well. And with that is a wrap on part 3 of our 2024 NFL season preview month, covering the NFC South division, which consists of the Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if you're a fan of either of these teams, or you're on the neutral playing field that likes the NFL and either of these teams, let me know your thoughts and your predictions and your takes on either of these teams in the comments below on YouTube, or send me a message on my social media accounts on Cold Lasagna at Twitter and Instagram. So in the next episode, we're going to be doing part 4, covering the NFC East, which will be the Eagles, the Giants, the Commanders, and the Cowboys. And then we'll be halfway. We'll be wrapping up the NFC portion of our season preview month. And then the episode after that will be on the AFC side. So some good stuff as we trek through NFL season preview month 2024. But until then, thank you for tuning into this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your filthy casual host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning into episode number 205 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. Also, don't forget to tune in after this episode. My previous episode, the Money in the Bank Fallout episode with my review of that show, and the post Money in the Bank Monday Night Raw, my review of both of those shows. So, yeah, until then, again, keep the lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And as always, peace out.